Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I will try to be the wolf, and we can think about the sheep, sort of reverse the normal situation in this country, where I feel more the other way around. But anyway, it's fun to pretend that I can do it otherwise. Thank you. A number of you got in touch with me over the weekend when Bill Moyers reran the interview that I did earlier this year, which is a very kind thing for him to do and which I appreciate. And so everybody around the country was able to see that interview again. And he does have hundreds of thousands of viewers, maybe even millions, I don't know exactly, but it's very, very large. And a sign of the interest in this kind of work. Before I start, I want to remind you and do something a little bit different. Remind you that these are the two websites where everything that you see here you can follow, learn more about, pursue, because pretty much everything I do goes on one or the other or both of those websites. The other thing I don't normally ask you to think about is when I do these every month, I don't get paid anything. This is a fundraiser basically for the Brecht Forum, and it always has been for the years that I've been doing it. But because I do as much as I am now doing, I have to have people who work with me, and those people, I know this is strange, they have to get paid. And that means I have to get the money so that I can pay them. Otherwise, they smile very sweetly and leave. And I don't want them to leave because I need them around me. Therefore, if any of you are so disposed, if you go to either of those websites, you will see the word donate. This is directed at you and has a clear message that must be unmistakable. So if you're moved to do that, please know that it will be deeply and gratefully accepted and appreciated. Okay. I want to do a few little short items simply because before I get into the more major discussion of what's been going on in the economy over the last month, as we normally do, these 4 items struck me as so illustrative of what is happening in the United States and around the world that it was simply too delicious for me to miss, or to miss the opportunity to go over them with you. The first one has to do with a company I assume most of you know, Costco. It's a big warehouse kind of place where you can shop. You know, it's like a big warehouse and you can get things cheaper than you can in a lot of other places. It's like Sam's Warehouse and a bunch of other stores like that. But Costco has been different. And I know that I don't normally single out a company for praise, but I'm kind of going to do that this time because it's really very interesting. Costco is unique among large companies. It's the 7th largest retail store in the world. So this is a very, very large company, Costco. It's unique for 2 reasons. One, its wage policies, what it pays. And number 2, what it gives its chief executive. It pays its workers way more than other stores like that do, and that's been going on for years. And it pays its top executive way less than other executives of comparable companies get. So, for example, and let me give you the numbers for the latest years. I believe this is for 2010, but it wouldn't vary much from one year to another. The chief executive, in case you're interested, Craig Jelinek, the CEO, is paid $650,000 a year as his basic salary. He gets a bonus of $200,000, and he has some stock awards. Now, I understand that for many of you, this is a rather attractive sum, and you wouldn't sneeze at it. But if you're the CEO of the 7th largest retail company in the world, what you would expect is many, many times that amount of money, because that's what all the other ones get. So that's sort of interesting that he's been doing that, and his predecessor's been doing that too. Much more important and interesting is the following comparison. Over the last year, Costco's average hourly pay to its workers, and it has many tens of thousands of workers, $20.89 an hour is the average. By contrast, Walmart lists $12.67 an hour, just to give you a comparison. 80% of Costco employees have company-sponsored health insurance. Walmart says it covers about half of its workforce. For those of you not familiar, I will tell you how the other half of Walmart employees get health coverage. They qualify for Medicaid. That's how they get it. It's very important that you understand that when a large company pays workers badly, the way Walmart does, we all pay the extra. We all pay the taxes that go to the Medicaid to give the medical insurance that that wage and that company do not give those low-paid workers. So we all subsidize Walmart, because if we didn't, then Walmart would have to pick up that cost or would face workers who were sick all the time, which they don't want. So what's interesting about this is A, the statement by most other competitors of Costco that they couldn't possibly pay higher wages because it isn't competitive to do so. Costco shows better profits over the last 2 years than any of the others, including Walmart. They've had a better record of rising profits than the others. Therefore, the argument that we cannot pay higher wages is false, even by the standards of the corporations and how they count. And the answer isn't far to figure. Costco retains workers much more continuously than Walmart. The people who come into Walmart also leave Walmart, since almost any job is as good as what you're going to get in Walmart, whereas they don't do that at Costco. So they hold the workers longer, the workers are more loyal, the workers understand the system, the workers feel better about the job, et cetera, and it shows up in the customer base and in the loyalty of the customers. And Costco has gone into that. So I'm not defending Costco. They still make a lot of profits off these workers. But the notion that you cannot pay workers a decent wage because otherwise you couldn't survive competitively simply is a wonderful proof that that's not true in the case of Costco. The next story is a story that is also apocryphal, I think, about the United States, and perhaps you didn't know about this. This has to do with a decision taken last October 1st in the city of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And in that city, the nonprofit institution that hosts and produces the Minnesota Symphony Orchestra told the workers that they would have to take up to 50% pay cuts and increases in their health care premiums by up to $8,000. And the 98 members of the Minnesota Symphony Orchestra, based in Minneapolis, went out and said, we won't do that. They didn't go on strike. They proposed to the employers that they continue bargaining while the orchestra continued to play and resolve their differences. The negotiating committee for the nonprofit organization told them no, and proceeded to do what in the language of the law is called a lockout. Basically said to these people, you can't come to work. There will be no Minneapolis Symphony Orchestra season, and there hasn't been any. And I could tell you a lot of stories about this. They're still on lockout. There is no symphony functioning. About a third, if I understand correctly, of the 98 people who in the orchestra have already found other jobs in other orchestras, so it's not clear when, if ever, there will be a symphony orchestra in Minneapolis. But here's a statistic I just found wonderful. The head of the negotiating committee, I mean, wasn't much negotiating, they just locked them out. But the head of the negotiating committee is one Richard Davis. He turns out to be the CEO, the chief executive officer of the Minneapolis-based U.S. Bank Corporation, one of the nation's fifth largest bank. So this is Richard Davis. So here's the statistic I just found, I just had to tell you about. In 2010, Richard Davis personally took home $18.8 million for his salary. And that was several million dollars more than the annual wage and benefit cost of the entire orchestra. So let me do that again. The man who locks out the orchestra of 98 people, assuming they all have kind of families, which musicians are known to have, right? So you screw over the 98 musicians, you deny the entire area of its world-renowned symphony orchestra, and the amount of money is several million dollars less than the amount that the guy who locked them out took home in 1 year. Again, as I have said to you before, if we had more time, I would stop now and we would play the national anthem. Because there's something extraordinarily patriotic about all this. Next item will interest some of you more than others for fairly obvious reasons. This is about a drug that is on the market called testosterone. And if you don't know what that is, ask the person next to you, okay? And if they don't know, you should be at a different meeting. Here's the statistics. In 2010, this drug, which helps males be more male-ish, wasn't very well known. So the advertising budget in 2010 for this drug was about $1 million, which is nothing. And the number of prescriptions that were written when there was no advertising was looks like 4.5 million prescriptions were filled. And drug company sales were a little over $1 billion. So it's already a nice business for the drugs, $1 billion to sell. Okay? Now we move 2 years further to 2012. The advertising budget has increased because it became clear that there are a significant number of males who wish to be more male-ish than they already are. So, what? And they're getting older. I don't mean to be disrespectful. I'm trying as hard as I can to keep a straight face here, okay? As advertising increased, in 2012, it went from slightly over $1 million to slightly over $110 million. That's what you call a hefty increase in 2 years, from 1 million to 110 million. The number of prescriptions went from a little over 4 million prescriptions to just under 8, doubled the prescriptions, and drug company sales went from a little over $1 billion to $2.2 billion, proving that if you advertise to males about maleishness, you're going to make a lot of money. This drug is a function of the advertising for it. It's really important for you to understand because it's true about an enormous array of medicines. If I had more time, I'd go over an analysis which a friend of mine did recently. Took about 40 different medicines that are very, very popular. And he showed the cost of these medicines, what it costs to produce the pill or the capsule or whatever it is. And we're talking 30 cents, 20 cents, because they're produced in a huge quantity. The price of the capsule or the pill, $6, $8. What's the difference? If you answer profit, you're wrong. The difference is advertising. Much more is spent on advertising the medicine than it costs to produce the medicine. Which means, if you think about it, that when you buy a medicine, you are paying the money that is used to convince you to buy the medicine. You are paying for being hustled. And again, if I had more time, I'd play the national anthem again. Fourth quick item. The largest bankruptcy in American history has been playing itself out in Alabama. So in case you missed it, I'm going to tell you about it. It's the county, it's called Jefferson County, and the county seat, I believe, is Birmingham, Alabama, which is a major southern city in the United States. And they have been bankrupt. And the reason they are bankrupt is a bunch of years ago, they needed to redo the sewer system because it was really very old and it wasn't functioning. And like many cities in the South, it has been growing quite spectacularly, and you can't survive with an old sewer system unless, of course, you're in New York. So they built a new sewer system, and if you build a new sewer system, it's extremely expensive. Billions of dollars were involved. And so then there was the question, how is this money going to be raised? By borrowing. And when you're borrowing a lot of money, there's lots of fees to be paid. And the minute the financial industry of America hears about this, they go to work. And I wanted to tell you what happened. The lead financier of this whole arrangement, getting sewers for the good people of Birmingham, Alabama, was J.P. Morgan Chase, our friendly Alabama bank, not New York bank, okay? And they went to work to get the contract to provide the financing. And they had all elaborate gimmicks, and they were going to save the county money. It was wonderful. It was written up in the newspaper. The mayor had his photo taken with the bankers, and the bankers with the governor. It was wonderful. So I'm not going to tell you the results. I'm reading from the New York Times. This is my source, so draw your own conclusions. I'm going to read to you. This was a story on Friday, June 7th, so very recent. Quote, "The corruption involved was breathtaking," in the New York Times. "More than 20 people, including politicians, contractors, and influence peddlers," it's a new career for you, "influence peddlers have been convicted." Now the next line is priceless. "J.P. Morgan escaped criminal charges." How do you escape a criminal charge? I mean, you can escape jail, or you can escape. They escaped the charge. They weren't even charged. However, the New York Times notes, the Securities and Exchange Commission penalized it for paying bribes through local middlemen. If the New York Times said you paid bribes and the Securities and Exchange Commission said you paid bribes, how exactly did you escape criminal charges, since it's a crime to pay bribes? That's wonderful. This, however, question did not occur to the reporters or the editors of this newspaper, who left it at that. More information. Okay, 4 people who served on the 5-county commission. By the way, exactly the same is done everywhere in America. A commission is set up, the commission on sewers, the commission on water, the commission on roads, the commission on schools, and the commission on hospitals. You get the game? Commissions are always set up. These are plum jobs all across America because you're the friend of the mayor or the governor or whoever's in a position to set up the commission. And why would you serve on those boring meetings of the commission looking into the sewer, about which you are utterly uninterested? Because you don't get on the commission to deal with sewers. You wouldn't know a sewer if you fell in one. You get on the commission because, well, let me read to you. 4 people who served on the 5-member sewer commission have since been convicted of taking bribes and sentenced to prison. 4. Raises a question, doesn't it? Here comes the answer. The 5th was convicted of obstructing justice by lying about the gifts she received from investment bankers. Notice the abstract term, investment bankers. But we know who they are. It's J.P. Morgan Chase, who just escaped being mentioned in the story, as they were earlier in the story. She was convicted of obstructing justice by lying about gifts she received from investment bankers. She received probation and testified against her former colleagues. Oh, this is charming. I should play the American national anthem again. They got caught because the community went for financial instruments sold to them by J.P. Morgan Chase, which had detailed, which none of them understood, details that ended up costing the county much, much more than they had expected to pay in interest and other charges, and the county couldn't do it. So the county had to declare bankruptcy. And so now the fight is, are these creditors, the people who bought the bonds that allowed them to build it, are they going to get paid or not? If the city and the county don't pay the creditors, they're going to use the money to do what? Well, to have a sewer. The people of the area, by the way, are told that part of the deal that's being worked out will have their sewer charges, which are already high, go up by at least 30% over the next 2 to 3 years, and quite possibly much more. They got caught. This game of commissions to redo the infrastructure of the United States is now happening all over the United States. The only question is whether or not you get caught. If you do, then the dirty linen is out here. So far, the biggest county in the United States to have this experience is Jefferson County in Alabama. Okay, let me turn now to the larger issues that have been in the limelight over the last month since we last met. The biggest story continues to be, day in and day out, the quote-unquote economic recovery. I've been talking about this for some months because it's the major story now for some months. Is there a recovery in the American economy? To which the answer continues to be, as it has been, yes and no. It depends on who you are, what you have, and where you work. So let's go through it again. And not much has changed, but the analysis, I think, can be made a little sharper. First, who's doing well? There are 3 areas that are doing well: corporate profits, the stock market, and some recovery in the housing. Now, housing is still a very depressed market compared to what it was several years ago, but it's not as bad as it was a year or 2 ago. So there's a bit of an improvement in the housing market, prices and so on, a big improvement in corporate profits, and a very good stock market, particularly the last month or so, rising stock market. So this is the good news, and that's what the focus is on. When you read about recovery, really that's what you're mostly reading about. And the hope of those who believe in a recovery is that what we just mentioned here, stock market, corporate profits, and housing, will carry the rest of the economy along, that this will spread, that the recovery at the top will trickle down and include everybody else. And the way this is supposed to happen in economics is by something called the wealth effect. Here's what the wealth effect means. If your wealth, what you own, goes up in value, the idea is you feel good financially, and you're going to feel comfortable about going out and buying a car or buying a house or making another kind of purchase. So the economy is going to get going because all the people who feel more wealthy, and who are they? People whose house price has gone up and they know about it, people who have a portfolio of stocks that have been raised by the stock market, or people who are directly involved in getting their hands on corporate profits, executives. So the idea is we're counting on the wealth effect. The critics of this notion make fun of this argument, and they do it around several dimensions. First, they point out that the wealth effect only applies when you are not immediately coming out of a disaster situation. If you've just gone through one of the worst crises in 75 years, you're not going to run out just because your house price went up a bit, or even if your stock portfolio went up, because you're still traumatized, as you will be for a while, by what you just went through and what it means. So to count on the wealth effect, these critics argue, is very short-sighted and not likely to work out. But that's not their main argument. Their main argument is you haven't looked at what else is going on. You've looked at the 3 pieces of good news: housing, stock market, corporate profits. Now let's look at some of the other things. Unemployment. Unemployment was under 5% in 2007 when this crisis hit. It zoomed up to 10% in 2009 and 10, and it's now about 7.5%. That means it's only halfway back to where it was. That's not much of a recovery. But it's much worse than that, these arguments point out, because the jobs lost over the last 5 years were relatively high-paying, secure, many benefits. And the jobs replacing them are low-paying, insecure, no benefits. And therefore, consequently, you're not even having half of the jobs come back, because in terms of their economic impact, what those people who are getting jobs can do isn't half, because it's not the same job, it's not the same situation, and therefore it's not going to have the same impact. One of the best examples, the automobile industry, which lost 100,000 workers or more in all the crisis years, is now only hiring back a small portion. But under the deal brokered by the United States government when they took over General Motors, and just for the record, the largest single shareholder of General Motors, who dominates all others, is the United States government. General Motors is not a private company. It is a government corporation. The largest automobile company in the United States was nationalized in 2008 and has remained so. And the only reason you don't know it is Americans do not know how to cope with what I just said. And when you can't cope with something that you hear, the solution is, I didn't hear that. And that's how we work. So I'm saying it just to be mean and make you uncomfortable, but it is the case. The deal that was brokered for the government to come in and buy all those shares and thereby rescue General Motors, which would have disappeared. We'd have no General Motors if the government didn't come in, bail them out by buying all the shares at a time when no one in their right mind would have done that, because the company was about to collapse. So the United States government rescued the company by pouring all kinds of money into it and now owns that company. But the deal included the following. All new workers hired after 2008, when the deal was done, would be hired at half the salary of old workers. The average wage of workers who've been there all through, about $28, $29 an hour. The average wage paid to the new workers, $15 to $16 an hour. Bingo. So hiring them back cannot save, for example, Detroit. Detroit is at the basket case economically, it's a tragedy, and it can't come back, because even when you hire people, you're hiring people at an equivalent salary that Walmart would be paying them. And they'll still need Medicaid if they get sick. Third item, to balance off the notion of recovery. The United States needs a thriving world out there to buy a lot of the stuff the United States sells. Is the rest of the world booming? No. The Chinese economy, which has been carrying the world for the last many years, is slowing down, slower now than it has been in a long time. So the Chinese economy cannot provide the boost to the United States and the boost to many other countries, because it's in trouble. Europe, the biggest trading partner the United States has, is in much worse trouble than China or the United States. They're in no position to help. And so those are very big drags on the American economic system. Next item to show you how complex it is and how much the notion recovery is really not just a shortcut, not just a summary, but it's really not true. There's an enormous worry in the financial community that what has been sustaining the economy has been an enormous pumping of money into the American economy by our central bank, which we call in this country not a central bank. Other countries have a central bank. You know, the Bank of England, the Bank of France, the Bank of Italy. We have the Federal Reserve, but it's the same thing, it's just with a different name. You know, you're not a bus driver, you're a transportation engineer. Okay, so we don't have a central bank, we have a Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve has been pumping huge amounts of money into the economy. That money goes into the hands of banks and big corporations, wealthy people, and they don't know what to do with it. They're not going to do what we all hoped, which is invest it, hire people, build factories. They're not doing that. They're not doing it because the American economy and the world economy doesn't warrant doing that. So what are they going to do? They don't lend it out because the interest rates are too low. There's nothing in it. So they go into the stock market and buy stocks from each other, because that's the only thing around to do where you can make a little bit of money. And they have been making money because the very act of going in and buying stocks from one another drives up the price. It fulfills the expectation that they had going in. That's why our stock market is going up. It's not going up because we're producing more. We're not. It's not going up because we have new technological breakthroughs that allow us to increase our production. We're not doing that. Our stocks are going up because a vast sea of money has nowhere else to go. It isn't going to China because China is slowing down. It isn't going to Europe where it used to go because that's an area in great difficulty. In fact, the money in China and Europe is coming here because compared to them, the stock market here looks like more. But this is all what we would call the build-up to a bubble. The stocks are artificially high based on nothing other than an enormous infusion of money that has no place else to go. Great fear then in Wall Street is, when will it break? When will the bubble pop? And so you could see in literally this, because it's only a computer stroke, that money that has come in from Europe and from China and everywhere else to take advantage of the stock market will run the other way the minute it looks like those prices are going to come down. Therefore, this is a recovery built on the shakiest of foundations. Last point. There's also another anxiety. It sits right below the surface, but I want to tell you about it, partly because I don't see you that often, and we're going to take off July and August, as we always do, and resume in September. But I want you to be aware of something that may become a really big issue, and boy, will you be sorry that I'm not here on a Tuesday to go over it with you. I'm kidding. And that is an inflation. We have a real serious problem. The world has pumped, the world's central banks, the European Central Bank, the Japanese Central Bank, and the Federal Reserve have all pumped trillions, with a T, of new money into the economy. It's swirling around buying shares of stock. But if the people who own the money were to get afraid that there's going to be an inflation, they would suddenly have a new kind of problem. All that money pumped in by the central banks is sitting in somebody's account, a bank, a wealthy person, a corporation. They're sitting on the money. Some of it they've used to buy shares, but even when they buy shares, the person they buy the shares from now has a lot of money. And here's the problem. If prices start to go up, the value of your money goes down. The value of a dollar shrinks if the prices you have to pay for everything go up. So what begins to happen is, if some of the people who have all this extra new money start buying goods and services, because they're a little bit nervous about holding this much money, and it may be safer to buy things that have value. I mean, what can you do with money? So they buy land and buildings and paintings and old whiskey and you know, what rich people buy, houses. Then the prices of all these things will begin to go up. Then everybody else, including you and me, will go, oh my God, I've got $10,000 sitting in the bank, and with an inflation going up 6% a year, 8% a year, 10%, that's what the value of your money is losing. And then everybody gets rid of money and buys things, which makes the inflation go nuts. So very quickly, if this starts, it becomes a firestorm. What prevents this from happening? Fundamentally, nothing. It's the job of the Federal Reserve, when that begins to happen, to pull the money back out of the economy after years of pumping the money in. But it took them years to pump the money in. Will they be able to pull it out in a rush? And if they do, if suddenly they take huge amounts of money, some of that money is money that won't be spent anymore on goods and services, and that's going to wipe out people's jobs. And whoa, are we going to count on the Federal Reserve to be able to protect us from an inflation? They were, after all, supposed to protect us from the economic downturn we're now in the 6th year of. They didn't do that. And so the prognosis for them being able to beautifully avoid the inflation, the conditions for which they've just established, the odds of that, small. So that sits as an anxiety. And if you deal with any financier in Lower Manhattan, that's what they'll talk about, because they're worried too. Yeah.
Yeah, something new, I think, fits in with this, but I'm not sure I've got it right. in the paper this weekend, first time I noticed it, there's huge, the housing prices are starting to recover. But and you have to have cash to buy it, according to the paper. And the thing that's new is lots of institutions and countries and stuff, they are the major buyers of this housing stuff. Now, interest rates are low, so that makes sense. They don't have any place to put their money. And I've never heard of that before. Now, maybe I'm just...
Okay, very quickly, I can deal with that. The decision has been made in large parts of the United States that the housing boom that lasted pretty much since the 9/11, as interest rates came down and Americans were able to borrow money and buy houses, that was an unsustainable housing boom based on debt, and it can't continue. Another way of saying that is millions of Americans who bought a house can't stay in that house. They can't afford it. They can't make the payments, and there is no prospect that they ever will, which means that economically you either have dead houses that can't be inhabited because there's no one who can afford to buy them, or you make a killing financially. You convert home ownership into home rentership. You say to people, okay, you can't afford a house, you never will, but you need a place to live, so we're going to buy up, and that's been going on, huge tracts of individual houses, but they're rented to people. They look like a neighborhood house, they look like a row house, they look like what they were built to be, but they aren't. They're rental properties. And Europeans and others are coming in, organized by American big banks, to create big pools of money that buy up these houses at very low prices because desperate families have to get out, and then they convert them into rental properties, and that's what's going to go on. That's what you're finding out about. Yeah. Okay. Final point on this. Europe is changing, and in a way that may presage, may preview what's going to happen here. For most of the last 3 years, the European governments have reacted to their crisis getting very bad by a policy known as austerity. They have cut government spending, they have raised taxes, and they have been very harsh on their people. That's why the unemployment rate is in the neighborhood of 25 to 30% in Greece, in Spain, and increasingly in Portugal, in Italy, and so on. Very, very bad. Those are depression numbers, like the 1930s. These are staggering statistics. That was thought to be necessary. A little bit like this government, which hasn't done it so much as the Europeans, but it's done the same thing, just not so much. I want to remind you, on January 1st of this year, the payroll tax went up from 4.2% to 6.2%. That's nearly a 50% increase. That's $1,000 out of the average American's take-home pay that the government is taking out. That's an enormous tax increase on the middle and working classes. It is exactly what both Romney and Obama swore up and down during the election they would never do, because they're going to protect the middle class. They love the middle class. They wouldn't want to live near it, but they love it. They love it. And they're going to protect it. And so on the first year after the election, they shoved it right there into the middle class by raising a payroll tax. What does the payroll tax pay for? Social Security. That's what that's for. The payroll tax goes into the Social Security. So they raised the tax dramatically on January 1st. And on March 15th, the President of the United States, Obama, announces that he's willing to make a deal with the Republicans to reduce Social Security benefits to people. Wow. In Europe, you'd have the people in the street. In a 3-month period, you increase what you're taking from the people to pay for Social Security, and you announce you're giving them less Social Security. Wow. And the American people, with a determination and a clarity and a commitment that exemplifies a model for the world, didn't do nothing. Nothing. They sat there, as they have for years now, in a kind of shell-shocked state. They can't quite believe it, which I kind of understand. It's a little much. No, it's a lot much. But Europe's worse, austerity. They stuck it to their people even harder than we did. And it's now cracking. the resistance against it, the daily street marches, the general strikes. June 27th, there will be a general strike, for example, in Portugal. The two largest unions in Portugal, one of which has 750,000 members, and the second one of which has 500,000 members, are leading a general strike. And the strike in Portugal, the unions are very clear. It's not against this or that employer, not at all. It's against the government's austerity program. They want it ended, and they want early elections so they can vote in a new bunch of political leaders because they're disgusted with the... Interesting, isn't it, that a trade union declares a political general strike. They're not bothering with this or that employer. They want to change the big picture. Compare that to the United States, where we don't have a general strike on any subject. What is that? What is that? How do you justify that? Think about that. Okay. I want to spend much of the rest of the time talking about something more important than all of this. Yeah?
Krugman and Stiglitz are arguing for deficit spending, a big stimulus, using the cheap rates to
borrow.
Spending. They're not worried about inflation. If you spoke to them instead of people on Wall Street, you get a different answer.
Yes. Krugman and Stiglitz, those people are Keynesians, and the classic Keynesian response to an economic downturn, especially one as bad as this, especially one that lasts as long as this, is to have the government come in and do all the spending for goods and services that nobody else is doing. Basically, the government substitutes itself for the private sector. Private sector won't play, won't invest its money in producing things, so the government will. And that's what they want the government to do. They want the government to step in. They say, look, it's cheaper to borrow than ever before. Every wealthy person and business in the world is willing to lend money to the United States because it's the only safe harbor in the world for money. So the American government can borrow from the whole world at record low rates. It should be doing it and pumping that money into the economy by buying everything. Build, you know, a new set of roads, new set of highways, new set of harbors. It doesn't matter. As Keynes once said, it doesn't matter what you do, we should each take in one another's laundry, was a famous remark that he said. Just spend the money and get people to work. So yes, that's what they've been saying that for years, and they're insisting on that. And they're cashing in, of course, on the fact that the crisis, which was supposed to be overcome by all the earlier policies, hasn't been. So the people in charge have failed, and so Krugman is in better and better form, as he says, you should have done what I told you. Absolutely right. But I want to look at something that is a longer-term problem, something that's going to be with us whenever this crisis is over. If we ever get out of it, and typically we do eventually, and people go back to work, and production resumes in some sense. Is that possible? Will we get out of the woods someday? My guess is that the reason we haven't seen trouble in the streets in the United States is Americans still believe we'll get through it. You know, it's a rough time, it's hard times, and they last longer than they were supposed to. That's true. But, you know, it'll get better. What else are we supposed to hope for or believe in? So I want to deal with that. And in order to do that, I want to give you an overview of what has happened to capitalism throughout its history in order for you to understand where we are now. So bear with me. I promise you, the little bit of history we're going to do, you'll see the point of it as we go along. So capitalism begins 300 years ago, roughly. And it begins, according to most accounts, modern capitalism in England. That's its birthplace, in the 17th and 18th centuries. And then spreads to the continent and so on. And the early phase of capitalism, the beginning of businesses where there's an employer and an employees, which you didn't have in feudalism before, you didn't have in slavery, the older systems. In this early capitalism, it's characterized by a peculiar development. Capitalism is a phenomena of cities. It doesn't happen in the country. It happens in little towns where people congregate, merchants. Logical, because that's where people are. And they attract the craftspeople to make the stuff that the merchant sells. So you begin to see capitalism developing across the towns and cities of Europe. And pretty soon, they kind of, to make a long, complex story short, they destroy what is called the hinterland, the agriculture. They pull the people literally off of the farms. You can't keep people down on the farm once they've seen the town. The town has lights, the town has bars, the town has a place to go in the evening, the town has things other than four legs to talk to, etc., etc. Right? So the town is attractive. And the capitalists also need workers. And the capitalists are producing the goods that all the people in the countryside want desperately to buy, rather than make themselves. Clothing, food preparation, utensils, all that. And so you have a development in which capitalism is an urbanizing phenomena that really wrecks the countryside, takes away the people, empties the countryside. What's left are huge farms that are run like capitalist enterprises, and all the little farmers who used to exist, all the little family farms are destroyed, and those people move to the city. By the way, exactly what happened to agriculture in the United States. We once were a country of literally millions of small family farms. That's a vague memory in the history of this country, but it's really not that long ago that that's what we were. Thomas Jefferson's image of a new America was an America composed of what was called Jeffersonian democracy, little farms, and little craftspeople in the little farms. And that has become a mythology of America anyway. We still have the TV programs where you're taught how to remember this, which hasn't existed for so long. I hope you're aware that about 4% of all farms do 95% of all food in America. That all the little family farms are there to make, jam for the tourists and a few other things, but they're not important for the basic agriculture of the United States. So early capitalism destroys the countryside and relocates production in the city, creating, of course, in the process, horrific conditions in the cities and towns, where vast numbers of peasants, farmers, are crowded as they come in off the countryside. And if you want to see today what it was like 200 years ago, visit Sao Paulo, Brazil, or any of the big cities of the third world who are surrounded by immense communities of desperately poor people without sanitation, without housing, etc. Extraordinary. And if you want to understand what it was in early capitalism, remember Charles Dickens, because his books are about that. That's what he wrote his famous serial novels about that you may remember from high school. In the second phase of capitalist development, after this was done, the story got written on a global scale. The new hinterland wasn't agriculture, because that had been wiped out in England, in France, in Germany, and so on. The new hinterland, from which new peoples would be taken, and from which the raw materials and the food that you need to feed all the people crowded in the city, working in the factories, that new part of the world was the colonial world. Asia, Africa, Latin America, taken over, reorganized as economies to serve the capitalists in the center. Those of you who've ever read works by, say, Samir Amin or Andre Gunder Frank or others will know this notion of center-periphery. The whole mass of the world is the periphery that provides the raw materials, the food that goes into the capitalist center, the United States, Northern Europe, Western Europe, and Japan, to feed this exploding capitalism, but at the cost of ravaging the third world, rendering these countries, many of whom were very comfortable and quite prosperous, into the economic basket cases they became, particularly across the 20th century, 19th and 20th century. And now we get to the third phase, and here you see now the history. Capitalism has a new plan. After ravaging the agricultural hinterland to create the first cities and bases of capitalism, and after the second phase of colonialism in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century, starting around the 1970s, we entered a new one. Capitalists began to realize something, that while they were bringing all the agricultural people into the cities, and while they were reorganizing the globe into colonies on the periphery and capitalism in the center, they also had lots of struggles with working people. All those unhappy people crowded into the city, became explosive. They made revolutions. They created an institution called the labor union. They created political parties, socialists, communists, all kinds of stuff. And when the dust cleared over the last 100 years and a half, they forced up the wages, which the capitalists could pay because they were literally ripping off the rest of the world in Asia, Africa, and Latin America to get the wealth that would allow them to build up capitalism and raise the wages, at least of the workers in the United States, Europe, and Japan. And in the 1970s, those same capitalists said, wait a minute. We have a new opportunity which we're not going to miss. We don't need to pay the high wages that have been built up over 150 years in the United States, Western Europe, and Japan. We have in the third world a much larger labor force than exists in the United States, Europe, and Japan. It is desperately poor, and it wants desperately not to stay that way. And they're now independent, and they have governments, and those governments want jobs to begin to give to their workers what they have seen in the United States, Europe, and Japan. And the companies said, hey, with modern telecommunications, with the internet, with the speed of jet travel, we don't have to have the factory down the road from us. We don't have to have the office here. We don't have to have the warehouse here. And that means we don't have to pay the wages here. We can relocate capitalism to another place. And we're going to do it. We're going to move to China and India and Brazil and you fill in the blank. And we're going to make a lot more money than we did before. The hinterland is going to become the center. And the center is going to become the hinterland. So I want to welcome you to the hinterland, which is your future. Because the enterprises have made the decision. I'm not talking about something that may happen or will happen. I'm talking about something that's already 30 years and running. It's gone. They're not coming back. Or to put it differently, those corporations will consider coming back here when the profitability of functioning here matches what they can get over there, which means the wages we have here have to look a lot like the wages they have had out there. They're looking up, but for the first time in the history of modern capitalism, the proletariats of the United States, Europe, and Japan are confronted with what capitalism is and how it works. Under one set of circumstances, it worked for you in America, Europe, and Japan. It brought you a secure job. It brought you rising wages. Not easy to get. You had to fight for them, but you got them. You were the center of capitalist growth. You aren't anymore. The capitalists took their investments and found another place. And they're gone. And they're leaving. And whatever this crisis is, however long it lasts, however hard it is to get back, we aren't getting back to where we were because we're in a crisis on a downtrend. And that has to do with the basic logic and structure of capitalist enterprise. So long as we have a capitalist system driven by profitability, so that what makes a company successful is its ability to generate high, rising, and secure profits, and that the greatest danger is that a competitor will do that, you're forcing every enterprise, not out of some good or bad social commitment, but out of the necessity of survival, to make the decisions that they've been making for 35, 40 years now. And that is to go. At first, the manufacturing jobs went. No surprise there. The highest wages in the United States went to manufacturing. The greatest incentive for an American capitalist to cut off workers is to cut off the highest paid. So of course manufacturing took it in the chin first. That was the biggest boost to profits, to lay off a $25 an hour machinist in the United States and hire a $2 an hour machinist in India who had the same classes and read from the same textbook. So yeah, manufacturing first. But then that kind of opened the floodgates. Now it is white-collar work. More and more educated, technically skilled, or even not so technically skilled. You can't sustain in this country you know, the people you call when your electricity goes out or your computer punks out, and you call up and you hear that accent. That's because you can't compete. You're paying people a tiny fraction an hour to sit in front of a phone mechanism in Hyderabad. They don't need them in New York or New Jersey anymore. And on and on and on. We're converting our universities into those, what do you call it? MOOC, long distance learning. I don't know what the letters stand for. What? Yeah, massive online courses or something like that, right. So we're converting that. I learned yesterday about a university that has on its plans in California, which is the United States' largest public higher education system in California, that they're going to have basically one economics, because that's my field, one economics professor who is going to be teaching introductory microeconomics or macroeconomics, and that will be electronically projected to the entire California system. One person will be paid, and everybody else will become, the euphemism in the academic world for peon is called adjunct. It sounds much, adjunct sounds like a job. So that's what we'll do. And we will solve all these problems, but it means both a bad thing but also a good thing. And I want to hammer at that in the time that I have. The bad thing is, well, I've laid that out for you. The prognosis isn't good. The thriving job market of America isn't coming back. There really is no warrant for telling you otherwise. It's cruel, it's deceptive, and it doesn't help you. However much it may lift your spirits for 10 minutes, the rest of your life is going to hammer the alternative into your skull one way or another. So I'm going to tell you. And you shouldn't come here in the evening if you don't want to hear about it. If this is depressing, then watch TV. It'll make you feel much better, much better. They don't bother you with this stuff as much as I do. But there is also, as Kaz said to me before he introduced me, there's also opportunity here. Because the traditional home of capitalism, the center, the United States, Europe, and Japan, are for the first time in the history of this system having to confront what this system can do, how it actually works. The illusion that by living in the United States or Europe or Japan, you're on easy street, you're at least in the right place. The million times we've all watched TV, some show about Africa or Asia, Latin America, where the subtext, which isn't hard to figure out, is, look at the house those people live in. I complain about my apartment, but look at that. There's a yak in the living room. You know, they don't have running water. The streets get muddy when it rains. You know, those endless pictures that drive home the message, whatever your complaints, capitalism has delivered to you running water and a nice apartment and a pizza, etc., and etc. The American people and the Europeans and the Japanese, each in their own way, each with their own cultural form, are confronting now the reality of the same capitalism they had before. But that capitalism is leaving. That capitalism is assigning to them the role that it used to assign to other people, and vice versa. Now it doesn't look so good. Now you'll see what? Let me provoke you. Maybe the last 50 years of leftist critique of capitalism, which celebrated the third world as the likely locus of revolutionary change will have to be rethought, because the locus may be shifting. The very illusions that capitalism brings you, rising wages, will be easier to sustain in the years ahead in China and India. They will be impossible to sustain here. Capitalism will always deliver the goods to those workers it hires, and it will screw everybody else. I'm confident in predicting that because that's what it's done all its life. But the people getting screwed and the people getting a deal, they're changing. Not because the system is changing. Not at all. The system is doing what it always did. But that now means a new set of circumstances. And it's going in a new direction. And that creates shock and awe. Not the kind you're used to from the military. A different kind of shock and awe. It's an American working class and a European working class and a Japanese working class that is going to have to come to terms soon with what is laid out. It is no accident that for the first time in American history, an entire generation of young people cannot get an education without absorbing a level of debt that transforms their economic future. They either can't get a job, or the job they get will not earn them the kind of money that will ever allow them to get out from under that debt. We know it. The default rate of student loans is way higher than any other kind of loan in America. It's already in the neighborhood of 9%, which is very, very high. And millions of students, when you talk to them privately, will tell you, I'm never going to pay that back. I can't. I won't. I'm making no plans on it. I'm making no provision for it. I'm done. And what are they going to do? Keep accumulating penalties, keep accumulating deferred interest? I mean, it's an impossible situation. But when a society gets itself into one impossible situation after another, that's called a clue. That's a clue something isn't working real well. Why are you saddling an entire generation of young people with these debts that are changing their decisions about what to study, where to study, whether to get a family, whether to have kids, fundamentally changing our country through this imposition of debt? Do you need the debt? Of course not. Most other industrial societies are not experiencing debts for their students. This is an American phenomena, par excellence. What's happening here? It's the same phenomena as allowing a man who earns $18.8 million a year to be in a position to shut down the symphony orchestra of a major American city, even though giving them the entire sum of their wage and benefit package for a year would still leave several $million in his pocket. What are you doing? This is a society spinning right out of control. And that, too, is a sign. Americans are no different from other people. We're no less smart or less capable or less imaginative than anybody else. We are caught in a situation which I think is best captured by that history of capitalism I gave you. It is American corporations that are leading the charge. 60% of the goods that come from China into the United States are produced by American subsidiaries who went to China because it's more profitable to produce it there, schlep it across the ocean, polluting everything in sight. It's still more profitable than keeping that factory going in Detroit. So Detroit becomes a basket case. The environment is polluted, but corporate profits are good. That's a system. And in the end, it's the system that will be held to account. Not just because critics like me say so, although I say so every chance I get. But it's not that. It's the understanding of people that they're caught up in a larger historical phenomena and that the only rational response is to question a system that works this way. Maybe we can excuse the Europeans, the Japanese, and the Americans for not asking the questions when they were at least getting the good side of the deal. But my guess is, as they realize that this system that brought them the goodies is now sticking them with the baddies, their willingness to entertain critical understanding will go by leaps and bounds, as it has in the last couple of years, but even more so in the years to come. You had a question, sir?
Yeah, my question is, what your view is on all kind of news articles where they say that because of lower energy costs in the U.S., that both U.S. companies are coming back, even in manufacturing, and also international companies.
My response is, you got to show me some evidence. The number of manufacturing jobs in the United States continues to decline. It's now at a historical record low, and there doesn't seem to be any change of that. And you know, energy is a global market. If the prices go down here, they'll go down everywhere else for the usual market clearing reasons. It will be nice for the United States that we have it here, but it hasn't been a major problem for the United States not to have it here, but to bring it in from the outside. It'll be good for the American balance of payments because we will export oil rather than import it, and that will change. It'll make a whole lot of governments in the Middle East shake because their ability to call the shots is going to change because they're not going to be the center. That's going to be very difficult for places like Saudi Arabia and Iran, and to a lesser degree Nigeria, Venezuela, and so on. But that kind of political economic shift, that's an old story. It'll shift again, and we don't know what's going to be discovered in the years ahead or what will happen with nuclear energy, which in a sense could trump, if we go back to it, what's happening with oil. So I don't think these are on a scale that they can compete with the larger historical pattern of what we're seeing. I think the important thing to understand is it's the same system driven by the same logic. It's just not letting the Americans, the Europeans, and the Japanese have this charmed position that ironically and accidentally they were the ones where the thing got going 300 years ago. But that's not really very important for the next few generations, what happened 300 years ago. What's important is what's happening now, and that is changing. I work with some big companies in Wall Street. I can assure you, they've made decisions already for the next 10 years. They're not, for example, they're not giving money to American universities. They don't expect to be hiring American engineers. They're giving money to set up a chair at Beijing University, at Hyderabad University, at the Institute in Sao Paulo. That's where their engineers are coming. That's the people they want to make friendly to them. That's what they need. That's where the growing demand for goods and services, particularly luxury goods, that's where it's happening. It's shrinking here. It's growing there relative to what it was. There will always be a core of rich people here. The profits at the top in America are greater than they've ever been because the people with the bulks of the stock get their hands on the profits that come from the profits capitalists make when they move from high-wage Europe and North America to low-wage India and China. They make fantastic profits. They distribute to their shareholders who remain disproportionately American. So at the very top, sure, there's a good reason why there are 40, 50, $60 million penthouses going for sale on Fifth Avenue. Of course. But what we have to understand is that the mass of the middle in America is dead or dying. There is no place for them. There is no demand for what they do, not just for the young people coming out of the colleges and universities, but for the 35-year-olds and the 45-year-olds and the 55-year-olds. It's not there. And they're having to take jobs with no benefits. Temp jobs is the biggest growing category, on and on. How many signs of this do you need before it dawns on you, wait a minute, this isn't about me, it isn't about I went to the wrong college, or I didn't major in the right topic, or I didn't, stop. This isn't about you. If you get a job, it isn't about you, and if you don't get one, it isn't about you either. Something much bigger than you, your coursework, your alma mater, or any of those other things you thought would determine your future. Your future is being determined by a system that works as it always did, but now not in the way your parents had hoped for or that you had expected. And the question is, what are you going to do? If you do like, I'll stop in a minute. If you do like most Americans, you will imagine, and this is really sad, you will imagine that this is an individual problem, that you can solve with some individual strategy. Take this course, move to this part of the country, learn a new skill. You're going to escape. It's like really being on the beach there near Fukushima when that tsunami hit. And you're going to run in that direction. Hello, you don't understand what a tsunami is. It doesn't matter what direction you run in, you're going to get drowned. See, that's what's in charge, because that's where you are in a much larger story. So if Americans look for an individual solution, it will be a sad, failed effort for which they will likely blame themselves. Or they will rediscover that for a social problem of the scale we're talking about, the only solution is a social movement for change. That's very hard for Americans. But then again, look at Europe. They never lost their sense of organization the way we did. They didn't have the last 50 years the massive destruction of the communist, socialist, and trade union movements, the three great organizations that got us what we got out of the Great Depression. They didn't have them destroyed. They survived. They're all there in the European countries. So they're able to mobilize socially. This last 2 weeks, final point, there was a crack in the governing, I don't know if you saw it. The International Monetary Fund, together with the European Central Bank and the European Union, were the Troika, it's called in Europe, the three entities that imposed austerity on Greece, on Italy, on Spain, on Portugal, on Ireland, et cetera, et cetera. And the IMF issued a report about 10 days ago in which it said for the first time, we made a terrible mistake in Greece. We hit them too hard, too soon, and we really wrecked it. They admitted to a mistake. The European Central Bank attacked the International Monetary Fund. No, you didn't. You did the right thing. They're terrified at opening the space for now the unanimity that was alone able to impose this on the mass of Europeans is cracking. No one knows exactly where this will go, but you can see it's like tectonic shifts of the Earth's surface. This is not a viable arrangement. I don't think you can impose on the American people, after 150 years of convincing them that we're all middle class, that America is a charmed place, that we will all do better than our parents, and our children will do better than us, and it's upward and onward and prosperous and progressive, and every president begins and ends his speech by saying, we live in the greatest country on earth. How will you go to a people like that and say, no, you don't? You're being outflanked by this one, this one, this one. This. Whoa. How do you cope with the mental crisis that imposes on people? I don't think anyone has an answer to that question. Thank you very much. I'm going to take a few questions. We have some time. Yes, ma'am.
question? How long the question?
You see all of these changes and transformations as made for revolution as happened in the past in a way that
You have a question?
I only hesitate because I'm a part of the American left. I'm happy to be a part of the American left, but I find the American left horrifically frustrating most of the time. And on this point, I guess what I would want to say is it's long overdue that we outgrow in this country the anxiety of organization, the anxiety of collective effort, that we stop hallucinating about the threats to our precious individuality if ever we were to join with other people in a collective effort, a change. And so I think what Americans do, with the best intentions, is to go out and have a little group over here that does that, or a little group over here that does that, and then jealously guard the little life that they've created in the hopes of keeping it alive, seeing other efforts on the left really as competition or threats or diversions of people's attention from what our little group is trying to do. And so it becomes very easy for the powers that be, that are quite well organized, to look at us as no threat at all, because we don't seem to be able to get our own acts together in any kind of sustained effort. I mean, we all get angry, or many of us do, at the Koch brothers. They're a popular target, these billionaire brothers in the energy business. But you know, all due respect, they put their money, or a lot of it, where their mouth is. They help all kinds of groups on their end of the political spectrum with money and support and assistance to build powerful organizations. I'm convinced that there are people on the other side who also have big money. Where are they? The Brecht Forum, as Kaz announced before I spoke, the Brecht Forum can't survive here. It won't be here very much longer. It doesn't have enough money. WBAI, a radio station that I broadcast, they're on the verge of dissolution because they don't get enough money. The Left Forum that I'm on the board of, we hobble along from annual conference to annual conference. We're safe for the moment. But it's a perpetual bake sale mentality that we have to have. What is this? I'm actually convinced that the left in the United States is much larger than the Tea Party and all of that, numerically. But when it comes to supporting organizations to bring, no, 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 no. No, 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 no. I'm not going to do that. There's something scary about it. There's something vaguely threatening about it. I don't know exactly what it is, but I know that if we don't outgrow that, we will forever be sniping at an entity that doesn't have to worry about that level of opposition. Doesn't amount to anything. Portugal is a poor country, but its trade unions are mobilizing everybody in the country to change the government, and they're doing a damn good job. And on the 27th of June, pay attention, Portugal as a functioning economy will stop. The trains won't run, the telephones won't work, nothing will move in that country the way they're planning it now. And other countries, they've been doing that. They have the ability to say, you know, we're in the end, we make the country go. So you cannot keep abusing us because we're not going to make it go anymore. And then what? Then the game is over. Then the dependence of this country on the working people stands revealed when they don't work. Well, what is it here in the United States? We've had fewer strikes in the last 2.5 years than we've even had before that. Conditions are worse than ever. Nobody does anything. Everybody's running around saving their own individual rear end as best they can. But, you know, if we're all running around saving our own, you know, we'll all go down. We'll all go down. That's my sense of what the issues are. Yes?
I ran a panel at the Left Forum. It was a little one, but it was interesting that a number of people that I asked to join the panel wouldn't join because they were scared stiff of being identified as going to the Left Forum. So,
Okay.
to your point, I've enjoyed everything that you've said this evening, and broadly speaking, I agree with everything you've said. The frustration that I have is that we've got better technology, we've got better science, we've got better knowledge than in all of history. We've got more young people around the planet that are educated than in any time in history, and the global economy is in a funk. And that, it shouldn't be in a funk. We've got to rewrite where capitalism or where the economic system is today. And I would love you to take the next step, which is not to say, if you will, we're in the fourth stage, and try and there is big data, there's all sorts of stuff we can do today that we could never do 5 years ago or 50 years ago.
Well, each big moment of historical change, this statement would have been made true. On the eve of the French Revolution, there were more educated people in Europe than there had ever been before. On the eve of the Russian Revolution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's always true, which doesn't take away from what you're saying. I think that, with all due respect to intellect, there's always a lot of smart people around. Smart people is not our scarce item. Courageous people, people willing to put themselves out there and take a chance and show other people that it's not as dangerous as you thought. The truth of it is, I retired from the University of Massachusetts, where I was a professor until 2008. And I made a conscious decision, I did, together with a few other people, that I would now stop focusing on academic work. I'd still teach a little. I teach at the new school here in New York, but I only do that as a visiting professor, which is a euphemism for someone who comes in, teaches his course, and disappears. But I made a conscious decision to try to see whether a pretty sharp critique of capitalism could possibly become popular in the United States. And a good number of people I spoke to before I made that decision thought I was crazy. They thought they knew the answer to that question. No way would this happen. This is not doable, because people are afraid to go to the Left Forum and be leftist or something like that. But I really do have to tell you, and I've done this a few times, and I'm going to do it again. I've done it now for 2.5, 3 years. I keep pushing the envelope. Look, I'm pushing it right now. This is being filmed. This is going up on YouTube and the internet. This is going everywhere. So I'm right out here. I didn't quite hide my political perspective. I assume you noticed that. So it's right out there. And if the word has to be said, I'll say it. Marxism. Okay, there it is. But my experience is that we can be very popular. I began this evening by saying to you that over the weekend, the Bill Moyers program chose to run the interview they already did with me back in February again. Bill Moyers is a very well-respected, nationally known, on the scene for decades. He would be the one to be worried. He could take a hit if this is a mistake. If this gets him a big blowback, he's in much more trouble be made for him than can be made for me. He made that decision to bring me on in the first place. He brought me back a month later for a second live interview, and now he runs it again. What's going on here? Last July, I did the Charlie Rose show. In December, I did Up with Chris Hayes. Some of you know MSNBC. Yeah, so the point is, I go around all over the place. All over the place. You're going to see, I'm not supposed to say, so I won't, but you may well see me in other bigger venues with more viewers than what I've already mentioned to you. Because guess what, friends? Americans, including the mass media, have discovered that an awful lot of people are upset about what's going on. And while they're not yet clear that they agree with me, I'm not claiming that, but they want to hear this. They want to hear it, and the people who run those shows are safe in bringing me on. And I'm not the only one, not at all. When I appeared, for example, on Charlie Rose, I appeared together with David Harvey. Some of you know him. He teaches at the Graduate Center at CUNY, and we were both on there. Charlie Rose brought both of us together to talk to him. That's an interesting decision that was made by that fellow with his audience. And there are more coming. So the truth is, I've made an experiment. You're all scientific people. I've made an experiment. Can you do this in a popular way? Yeah. And will the American people give you the time and space to make the argument? Yeah. Will the mass media allow you to do it? Yeah. They will. Let me be provocative to you all. It used to be true for a long time that we could tell each other, commiserate with each other, that we can't get publicity, we can't get exposure. They won't let us say what we have to say. They won't listen. But now, in the last 2 or 3 years, we can't excuse that, and we can't use that excuse anymore. It's up to us. This is a moment when we can do a lot of things we couldn't do before. The Left Forum may have frightened your friends, but the Left Forum, I just got the numbers. We had over 4,000 people gathered at Pace University between Friday and Sunday. That's a lot of people. It's the third year that we've crossed the 4,000 threshold, coming from all over the United States. They wouldn't be coming if their careers were over. 2/3 of them are academics. They have to go home, and they were videoed, and they were exposed, and blah, blah, blah. And believe me, if we were that scary, Pace University, which is a private, business-oriented university, would never have signed these contracts with us year after year to do something that all the left media come and celebrate. And there's Pace University in the Wall Street area all over the place. We have opportunities now. It would be the biggest tragedy of all if we don't try to move. And I'm here to tell you, a lot of movement is possible. A lot of movement. Yeah.
Yeah, I just was thinking about something. I live in New York, but I grew up in Iowa. And this last year I went to 2 high school reunions because I went to one place and moved to another. And the thing that struck me there, and by the way, one of these places, they've known I was a red from the beginning because I had some artificial notoriety in the city. And the thing I noticed was, number one, what I talked to them about is their kids or their grandkids, or some of them start. And I think there's a certain sense in thinking of that is who the key is. Most of us are pretty old. What we've got, we'll probably make it through, or maybe we won't. But it's those kids that are the key. And I've sensed, when I went there, people no longer, we always got along fine. But people were a lot more accepting and curious. The other thing I just want to say, this fall will have, I don't know whether it's our 37th, 8th, or 9th annual convention of Teamsters for the Democratic Union. They put out millions of pieces of literature in the early 80s calling us everything in the book. And it didn't put us out of business. Now, we haven't taken over the world. We've had our victories and our defeats. But I'll tell you, if you're doing something that represents people's interests, the word communist will not scare them away if you're tough enough and if you don't play tricks on them.
Okay. There were some young people that grimaced at a certain point, just so you know.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. Let me just see that. Yeah.
Yeah, I could sort of testify to what you've been saying, because I spent a large part of my college years refuting Marx. It's probably the wrong
But about a year ago, one of my friends, who's a member of the Breakfast Forum, put one of your videos on Facebook, and I've been circulating your videos for a year.
Thank you.
So I think that it trends. I mean, I think it's great that you're a Marxist, but I think it's bigger than Marxism.
Oh, sure.
As an ideology, I think it's got a reach.
You know, apropos Marxism, which, you know, lurks always a millimeter below the surface of what I'm telling you, I do feel is sometimes an obligation as a speaker. If you find what I do, either in these Tuesday evening talks or on my website or when I'm talking to Bill Moyers, if you find that interesting, persuasive, provocative, that's Marx. That's not me. I'd love to take the credit, but I don't have a big enough ego, and I have a big one, but I don't have a big enough ego to grab for that. Where do you think this comes from? I developed it? This is me who did this? Stop. You know that that's not true. Nobody does that. That's an enormous tradition of thinking with lots of contributors from all parts of the world. I thought at a certain point as a young person, I need to learn this stuff. This was I learned it. And it has helped me to do what I do. So if you find what I'm doing interesting, you're already halfway there. And you shouldn't be afraid of it, you know. It doesn't bite. The other thing about Marxism is this. Karl Marx is born 1818. He comes to his maturity in the 1830s and 40s, right? He's a product of capitalism. Capitalism created this man. Capitalism comes into the world boasting of the slogans of the French Revolution. Capitalism is going to realize liberty, equality, fraternity, the three great words that the French revolutionaries carried on their banner. Liberté, égalité, fraternité, right? And Beethoven is moved by it, and all the great thinkers of Europe in the 100 years since moved by this French Revolution. The American Revolution copies the language, the very imagery. But Marx is one of the people who, loving the French Revolution as he did, looks around him in 1848 at the Europe, 50 years after the French Revolution, and he says, let me see, I'm looking around here. Where do I see liberty, equality, fraternity? Answer, no place. What we got is capitalism. But the promise of capitalism, that it would be the vehicle to bring and establish liberty, equality, and fraternity, that's false. Capitalism doesn't bring them. Capitalism is the biggest obstacle to them. And therefore, we got to go beyond capitalism if we're going to be true to liberty, equality, and fraternity. When people say Marxism is defeated, socialism is defeated, capitalism rules, that's the best guarantee for the future of Marxism I could imagine. Because Marxism is capitalism's shadow. You don't get one without the other. You never have. Capitalism, like every institution, produces its celebrants and it produces its critics. The critics are not going to disappear any more than the celebrants are, and they're going to fight about it. And when capitalism performs as badly as it now is, the critics get a leg up and the celebrants feel awkward. That's our time. And it's really important that we, if I can borrow a phrase, seize the time. Yeah. Did you have a question? No. Yeah.
My question is about college costs. Why is it that more hasn't been done to lower the cost of colleges? I mean, if these universities have hundreds of millions of dollars of endowments and people can't afford to go to them, why hasn't more been done to lower the cost?
Well, you got to keep in mind the structure of American higher education. We have somewhere between 16 and 20 million Americans that go to colleges and universities. 3/4 of them go to public schools. Those public schools all came up like mushrooms after the rain after World War II. World War II revived the American working class from the horrors of the Great Depression and the privation of the war. And as working people realized they could have a job, that they were part of a capitalism that was working for working people in the 40s and 50s, they began to think big. And the big new thought in the 40s and 50s in the United States for working people, the big new thing to get was not, as you might imagine, a TV, important as that was. And it was not to have your own car, and that was important too. But the big one was to get an education for your kid, to break out of that which separated you from the ruling class and the upper class. Those private schools that had been existing in this country from the beginning, the Harvards, the Yales, all of that. And the only way to do that would be a massive government effort, because the private sector didn't see profit in it, the private sector didn't want to do it, the private sector wasn't going to do it. So either you would frustrate the mass of the American working people, which would be a dangerous thing to do, or the government had to do it, and the government did it. And so we created all these state of California, state of New York, state of New Jersey, public higher education systems. And they were all funded by the government. It was socialized education. Of course, we didn't call it that because we were in the middle of the Cold War. And socialized education was a bad thing communists did. So we pretended, like we do today, that General Motors is a private corporation. No, it isn't. It isn't. Hasn't been for years. But we pretended. So here I am telling you, it's funded by this state. But now, fast forward to the present. We're in an economic crisis. The only way to raise money to keep funding our public higher education is to tax the rich, because nobody else has anything anymore. And the rich don't want it, and the corporations don't want it. Therefore, public education is over. Now, it can be over in 15 different ways. You can shut the place down. That would be a little dangerous. That's going to get you into trouble. So you slowly strangle it. You make a university become a state's college. You make the state college kind of morph into a community college. You get the picture? And you jack up the price, and more the students have to pay. And so they begin to have questions, like the New York Times 2 weekends ago, where I read, a great deep question is afflicting American families. Does it really pay to go to college? You know, I may not be able to spend all that money, take out all that debt, and I'm never going to get it. It may be wiser for me. What? What? This is a way of culturally preparing people. It's like telling you, you know what you need, you who enjoy hamburgers? You need to go on a diet because you'll look beautiful. And I'm going to give you something with a lot less fat in it. I'm going to call it Hamburger Helper. And it's, what it is a little bit of protein and a lot of stale bread. But I'm going to mash it together with some chemicals you don't want to know about. And it's going to make you thin and beautiful. Yeah. Well, this is how you do that. Thin and beautiful. Meanwhile, the little detail, no meat, is slipped by you. And the little detail, no education. You're going to sit in front of a screen. You're going to have those MOOC, those distance learning crapola. That's what, all the interaction, all the possibility of a teacher interacting with you and inspiring you and changing who you are and where you develop as a person, all that's gone. You're going to be watching television. You thought you were done when you were 16? It's going to be right through college. You will never be away from a screen with some talking head coming at you. College education is being rewritten back to what it was before World War II. It's a specialized, elite program so that the children at the top mingle with the right people at the time that they're beginning to be sexually active, looking for a life partner, and they should have their dances with the right counterpart of the other sex or the same sex. Nowadays it's a little less rigidly separated. You know the picture. That's what it's for. It's a finishing school, which they used to be called. And it finishes off the people at the top. For the rest, we're going to slowly choke it to death and bring us back to where everything else is going back to where we were. right? You're all choosing between shopping at the fancy boutique on Madison Avenue or heading out to TJ Maxx. Those are your options. There is no more in the middle. Sears is gone, Kmart, all of them. The ones in the middle for the mass of people, they're not there anymore. You're learning about fuel economy. Why? Because we're not going to give you a big car anymore. You're going to have a little closet on wheels. It's going to take you around. And you're going to be happy because you're going to be told this is environmentally wonderful. Really. So is Hamburger Helper. You know, you can cram Hamburger Helper into the gas tank and move that closet a few steps further. It's the process of an adjust. It's how a society adjusts, but it's how a society adjusts when there's no resistance. Last note. There was an attack by a liberal Democrat on public education at the lower level. It happened 2 months ago in Chicago, led by Rahm Emanuel, Mr. Obama's former chief of staff or whatever he was. He went after the school system. He proposed to shut, I believe, 40 or 50 schools, particularly in black and Hispanic neighborhoods, et cetera, et cetera. And the teachers' union fought back. And they did pretty well. They got a compromise, but they did. The teachers fought back, and they fought back pretty courageously, and they pushed them back. It's doable. But you had to have a very militant union, which it is. They had a very powerful, charismatic woman, Karen Lewis, a black teacher who was the leader of that thing. And, you know, of course, it helps to have a charismatic leader. She was one. And so she was able to pull this together and to do a very good job in holding it back.
Well, cool. The caucus that eventually got the power, core.
That's right, within the union.
Right.
That's right.
Committee of rank and file educators. A lot of what we're talking about here is organized. And that in fact, what's happening right here now is like it has to happen on a massive scale. You talked about how the attacks on the left and the trade union movement. Well, the fact is, in this country, trade union movement, the best of it, the CIO, has been in retreat since the 1940s, since World War II, and that I've been a union officer several times, and a delegate to the AFL-CIO in New York City. And yet I have never managed to complete my AFL-CIO training because they miseducate people a lot. So I've been asked to leave. What we have to develop is that education on the ground because in the 1970s, capital changed how they organized as a class. And the union leadership never caught up. They have not caught up till today. And with all that you've done, they've never asked you to do anything.
Correct.
And what we have been looking to, there have been groups of folks on the left who thought they could capture the unions or stage a coup from somewhere within. What we have to organize has to come from the top.
No, it is interesting. A footnote. It is interesting. I have made, and I continue to make, offers to the labor movement to work with them in any way that they might find you. And there are some interested. But in general, this gentleman's comment is correct. They're too hesitant. They remain hesitant. So it's amazing to watch 50 years of steady decline. In the private sector today, less than 7% of private sector workers are represented by a trade union. It was once 30-something%, maybe even 40%. So you have a long-term decline. You would think any institution whose strategy produced a 50-year decline would be in a fundamental self-critical frame of mind because you're now so small that if you don't do something, you're going to disappear. But you'd think Folks, I would love to, one more, the lady.
Yes, about Marxism, something I love and study, et cetera, but the countries that had it, for example, Hungary, different countries that had it, look what happened. Ginsburg was there, different people were there, they were so happy when it was over, so how can that be?
Well, you know, maybe a session in the fall when we resume about Marxism and its history. Let's be real clear. Marxism begins with good old Karl Marx. Remember I told you he was born in 1818, he dies in 1883. So he lives across the 19th century. 1883. So that's roughly 130, 140 years. In that time, Marx, a little German intellectual who lives his life, most of it in London as an exile, you know, writes a bunch of books and pamphlets. In 125, 135 years, his ideas have spread into every country on the face of this earth, penetrated and intermingled with every conceivable language, religion, culture, ethnography, you name it. It has been a tradition that has absorbed the entire population. Every different kind of people, with every different kind of background, have interpreted it in a way that made sense to them. There is no such thing as Marxism. There's only Marxisms, plural, lots of them, lots of different interpretations. You'd be hard-pressed to find any intellectual movement of social criticism in the history of the human race that grew so fast, so far, in so short a time. Marxism is nothing to think of as having not succeeded. It's the biggest success story there is. There's no country on earth that doesn't have Marxist magazine, Marxist organizations, Marxist political parties, Marxist trade unions, Marxist professors. My goodness, that rivals the growth of Christianity, Islam, or anything else. Well, it does as a mass movement. But it also means a kind of cacophony, a kind of wild noise of different interpretations. Hungarians do one thing, and people in Mali do something else, and Sekou Touré in Guinea did one thing, and Nkrumah in Ghana did something else, and Castro, and my goodness. You know, and so if you want to understand Marxism, you have to understand not only that so many different cultures made their different interpretations, but each of them was at a different stage of economic development. Some of these were countries had no industry at all. Others of them were highly industrialized. Some of them had a working class, well organized. Some had no working class at all. I mean, wild what was done. And you have to also understand then that the early experiments, starting in 1917 in Russia, to try to concretize this, or later in China, or later in Cuba, or later in Vietnam, these are the early efforts. They're full of mistakes, they're full of tragedies, they're full of dead ends. Of course they are. If you ever study the transition out of feudalism into capitalism in the 16th, 17th, 18th century of Europe, you know what you discover? Capitalism takes hold here and then collapses. Capitalism begins to grow here and is then overcome by its own conflicts. Capitalists in one place go to war against capitalists in other, destroy each other, and the feudals return. It's a long, slow process to overcome an economic system that's been in power and secure for hundreds of years. And the early efforts are that. They're early efforts. We have to learn from them. We have to be critical. I mean, I'm not excusing anything. We who are interested in making the experiment successful are the ones who most need to understand what went wrong in the early ones. Where mistaken, what not to do again is at least as important as what to do. But we haven't got there yet. We're still in the aftermath of the Cold War. We still have people who either think you have to denounce it all as horrible or you have to celebrate it all as wonderful. That's childish. We have to outgrow that crap and see what's worth preserving, what's worth remembering never to do again. And out of that, learn something. That's what a mature movement does with its own mistakes as it goes along. Folks, we have exceeded our time. Thank you very much.